Hi, I'm Jenny Nelson. I'm the Associate Director of Research Content at the ASAE Research Foundation, and I'm very happy to welcome you to ForesightWorks Live. This is a new program for us, and it's something of an experiment. We thought it was a good time to bring people together to have a conversation about the changes we're facing. This program is grounded in our ASAE ForesightWorks research, but our focus today is on taking an abstract concept and talking about practical applications and future possibilities for associations in our communities. To that end, we need your participation. As you watch the pre-recorded conversation, please use the chat not only to ask questions, but also to share your experiences and ideas. Our panelists are also in the chat to answer your questions and provide additional insights. There will also be pop-up questions that will appear on the screen at regular intervals. These are designed to get your input about the biggest takeaways, and so we can get a sense of how everyone's feeling about these challenges. These questions and crowdsourced answers will be shared along with other takeaways after the event, so keep this in mind as you're responding. We would also love for this conversation to continue and expand beyond this session, so we'll share a link to virtual space where we can continue the discussion in the executive management community and collaborate. Please note this space is limited to ASAE members. A big thanks to Association Analytics for sponsoring this program and making this conversation possible. I'd also like to thank you for joining us and adding to this conversation. And on that note, let's get this discussion started.
All right, so let's get started talking about fast data. I'm Julie Shulo, CEO of Association Analytics, and we have three wonderful panelists with us today. So why don't each one of you introduce yourself and give us your definition of fast data or one really cool way you have used it recently. So let's start with Emilio.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emilio Rocho. I'm the Director of Technology and Digital Services with the National Association for Healthcare Quality in Chicago, Illinois. I also serve on the Board of Directors for the National Technology Network, N10, and so I'm really preoccupied with this idea of how nonprofit businesses marry business logic and business outcomes with technology. So this fast data conversation, I'm thrilled to have it today and to talk to you all and learn from you. I can't help thinking about a definition of fast data without thinking about what the outcomes are associated with it, because it's always nice to have data, period, but ideally it's pursuant to some goal. So when I think about what qualifies as fast data, I'm thinking about, that ASAE definition of fast data in the context of enabling quicker, much more nimble strategic decision-making to produce positive outcomes for your organization or for your membership.
Absolutely, and more prevalent than ever right now. We'll get into a little bit more of that. But first, Kristin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristin Berry. I'm the Senior Director of Business Analytics with ASAE, the Center for Association Leadership. And when I think of fast data, I just think of real-time data and real-time decisions. And of course, now more than ever, we're using data to make decisions. And in particular, the thing that comes to mind for me is the way that we're using our online community data to understand what our members are talking about, how they're affected, specifically about COVID, but we've used it in a lot of other instances too. So real-time data, real-time decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Data, tomato, whatever. All right, and Mark?
My name is Mark Sadachek. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the North Carolina Association of CPAs. I think the definitions of fast data have been great so far. I look at it as how can we use data at a moment's notice right now. Our life, our livelihood, especially at NCCPA, is changing so much as our profession is faced with a lot in serving their own firms and organizations, but also in the community they serve. So we are in this, new phase of working with A2 on expanding our data from more of a monitoring kind of legacy approach to getting real-time data so that we can make real-time insights and decisions because that's just what our members expect of us, and that is what I expect of our team.
Yeah, that's interesting. I recently read, I think it was 80% of consumers are more likely to buy from you if you know their name, if you know their product history, and of course can recommend something relevant. And fast data obviously enables you to do that. So very timely. So let's jump right into it. So now that we know the definition of fast data, thinking about historically how your association has looked at things compared to now, Kristin, do you want to start with talking a little bit about how historically you guys have looked at it and how fast data and or the pressures of COVID or anything else have really changed your mindset and behavior, really.
Yeah, I mean, before our analytics initiative, which we launched about 5 years ago, there was a lot of, asking IT to run a report and waiting a couple days until they could do the report, and then looking at the report and realizing you don't need that report, you need another report. So it took a long time to get the answer that you were looking for. And then sometimes by the time you got the report, you actually were kind of over it to begin with, or kind of moved on to something else. So having our data warehouse, having fast data, having real-time analytics allows us to make decisions much more quickly. And, people are actually excited about seeing the data, being able to kind of play with the data and asking ultimately a better question, because they're able to dig in at the moment into the data to get deeper insights.
Absolutely. And I know this can often drive operational as well as strategic, tactical decisions. So Emilio, can you think of any maybe operational changes that you guys have made using fast data, or you'd like to make using fast data?
That's a great question. I definitely hear a lot from what's already been said about kind of the perils of a more traditional reporting model, where you go ask for your report and then maybe you wait a while, then you get it, and maybe it's not exactly what you really wanted. I would say, something that feels more traditional are kind of like two buckets of reporting or operational reporting. One where we're looking for thumbs up, thumbs down. Are things on track or are they off track? And for those kind of reports, typically we're looking at benchmark data. Where were we at this point last year? Those kind of questions, and answer them, not necessarily to derive a strategy, but to just feel good or feel badly about the current state and then to act. And then there's another category, I think, of reporting where people are just drowning in data, and there's an opportunity to potentially make sense out of something that the organization is not currently capitalizing on. So there's a request or an initiative to say, wade into that big dump of data and see if you can find something useful. I think neither of those kind of models directly apply to the best application of fast data. So when I think about operationalized fast data, I'm really thinking about what are opportunities for us to articulate a more holistic strategy of what's going on, and then to identify the breakpoints of the successful enablement of that strategy, and then monitoring those things in that strategic framework so that we can optimize, we can change plans, and we can directly correlate those efforts to the outcomes that we want to achieve. That's definitely the direction our organization is moving in right now. It requires capacity, like human resources that are game for this conversation. It requires convening at an executive level to really articulate the funnels for the organization, to identify the drivers, and to measure and articulate the journey through those drivers for our business. And so as we go to operationalize that moving into this year, we've resourced it at the staff level with an analytics manager position we didn't have before. And we're also reorienting our executive team to convene on this subject so that we can be more prepared to pivot and adjust, but also leverage data even more than we are currently.
Yeah, that's really great. And that's something that I've certainly noticed is people moving from monitoring to actually taking action now. And it's the pressure of you have to. And so you're seeing more and more people move in that direction. You hit on something else that's interesting too, kind of the retraining or reintroducing of the executive staff or leadership staff to the resources available. Mark, has that been happening at all at NCACPA? I know you guys were already very data driven, but how have you guys maybe reintroduced or seen a change or shift in culture using the data?
Yeah, when Amelia was talking about, adding new staff and whatnot, we don't have that luxury. So what we've really had to do was really roll something out and kind of reconfigure how do we make something that is so much more user friendly for all of our staff. And by doing so, some of the executive staff that maybe aren't naturally data analysts or have some of that history with data, to make it easier for them they don't need to be SQL coders. They don't need to understand so much about the query language and are they pulling the right population. We've made it easier for them to be able to look at data in a real-time format, and actually are rolling out biweekly quizzes to make sure that everyone is continuing to use this and not just enjoy that we have a platform that we've invested in, but they're actually using it, and that kind of goes with our overall culture and philosophy of we spend a lot of time internally looking at the different personality profiles, the different preferences, what makes us kind of stronger collectively. And I think what my hope is, we will find that having those different personalities and different perspectives involved in data and aware of what's going on in the trends will actually help us help bring maybe better decisions or introduce different perspectives that some of us may not see, that think maybe one way. So that's how we've been doing it, and widespread. Everyone has loved it so far.
That's really great. I know adoption can be a challenge with anything, right? Any sort of change management, fast data certainly being one of those. So Kristin, have you guys done anything to drive kind of adoption and awareness and even data literacy at ASAE?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really helpful to have a partner or an advocate on the executive team or the senior leadership team, because I am not that person. So having someone constantly be that person of have you looked into the data on this? What does the data say, has been really helpful to move our data, our appetite for data forward. We also have lots of brown bags with our staff to talk about what is available, how to use it, and I am fully devoted to analytics, so I'm also here to personally help folks understand kind of the context for some of the data and the why behind it, and we're trying to teach them to be able to fish themselves as well.
Yeah, that's really important, right? And it gets rid of that old model of having to go to IT or even go to an analyst now, and really moves towards self-service BI. But that comes with training and adoption. And so let's talk a little bit about the technologies you guys are using or have used or would like to use, whatever it may be, that you can kind of talk about how you're using it, what it is, because I often say it's actually not the technology. The tool doesn't matter. It's usually the people in the process. But I always get the question anyways on tools. So we'll cover the technology piece and then, talk a little bit more about application of fast data. So technology, Mark, do you want to start?
Sure. We actually historically, or for the last few years, had used Tableau from a data visualization perspective, and we were only able to get in a few of our platforms, a few of our data leads into it. So it really wasn't a holistic view, to use Emilio's definition earlier, and that is critical for any organization. And so what we've done is we've moved to Acumen, a cloud-based platform using Power BI, and that has opened up so many eyes on the adoption side, and it's just made data real, and especially the dashboards. So we've changed to that, and we are in the process of getting every data feed possible looped into it. So now, to Kristin, I think you had said something earlier about some of the customer or member sentiment on like your Connect communities, and how does that loop in with maybe the demographics of where they are, where they work, how old they are, etc. That is exactly what we're building, because you need to know that information and then act. That helps with acting on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Amelia, what about you? What technologies are you using? And then what challenges too have you run into kind of applying some of, whether it be the technology or just fast data in general at your organization?
I really loved your preface to the question, because the first tool that jumped to my mind that we're using right now is PowerPoint. So, as we do these data initiatives, as we try to convene more strategically on data, communication is like the #1 goal. So, before we break off and engage in technology projects or evaluate technology tools, it's that communication about what we're trying to do. That strategic alignment is so important, I think, from a sequencing perspective. So that's why PowerPoint jumped to my mind at first.
Yeah.
In terms of the tools that we use for reporting, we're a scrappy organization. And when we are trying to leverage fast data, it's really to one objective, which is enabling us to pulse faster as an organization, because that's going to help us win. That's going to help us win big. And so that is really the objective with which we're leveraging fast data initiatives as an organization. And so we have to be extremely flexible, and we also don't have huge margins. So we have to be a little bit scrappy with our approach. So it depends on the reporting requirement. We still haven't mapped out our tech infrastructure for 2020 and what that's going to look like. But I can tell you right now, we're seeing very quick wins in leveraging Microsoft Power BI, because we're already on the Microsoft Office 365 platform, and it's just sitting there waiting to be used, and it can do amazing things. We also are leveraging Google Data Studio. There's no BI platform we won't try to enable our organization to pulse faster, to move quickly with fast data. But those are some of the tools that are top of mind for us right now. Of course, communication being like the most important thing in the whole process.
Yeah, really good point. Yeah, there are a lot of data platforms out there. And so, continuing to explore and look at all of those, and really important to get the quick wins. And that's always important when you're building a data culture or trying to drive adoption or applying fast data, right? Because you need to be able to make that action pretty quickly. So Kristin, what about you? What tools and technology are you guys leveraging that you really see working?
I think, like both Mark and Emilio said, we're using Power BI because we use Office 365. So it's there for us. More staff can have access to it because some of the other tools are more expensive. And we have, a lot of people that are accessing Power BI. The other thing that I enjoy is they have a lot of AI built into their visualization. So I don't need to be a statistician to develop a regression anymore. I can use some of their key influencer visualizations to be able to see, things that influence, say, retention or attending annual meetings or things like that. So I think it, allows me with, relatively limited technical knowledge to really kick it up a notch and provide, ultimately my customers, the staff, with the insights that they need to make better business decisions.
Yeah, really good point. Data scientists often say it takes 80% of your time to kind of wrangle your data and make the data model. And then you spend 20% of your time actually analyzing it. So there's a lot that goes into actually pulling that all together. And some people have the advantage of having everything in a data warehouse, but you shouldn't let that stop you, right? And I think that's part of what Emilio and you and Mark are all saying is there are still things you can do to get small wins, to pull data insights together. So that's really great. So now let's talk about the application of fast data. So Kristin, we'll start with you. What is an example of an application of fast data? And then how has it impacted the overall kind of functions at ASAE?
Well, I mentioned it in our introduction. The way that we are using the data from our online community Collaborate is just amazing. It has really changed the way that we get information about what's top of mind for our members. We use it to help inform our content strategy, especially in times of crisis, like with the COVID and also with GDPR. It really just provides us with a roadmap for how to serve our members and resources that our members need to fulfill the mission of their organization. So we've been using that in so many different ways. We no longer have to send a survey out to our members asking them what is important to them. They're actually asking questions and basically telling us that via Collaborate. And it's actually with COVID in particular, I feel like now we have even more of an appetite for kind of the voice of the member, or like a listening almost module, where we can gather insights from not only Collaborate, but perhaps our chat feature, open ends from our surveys. So we've been talking a lot about how we can really kick up the use of unstructured data within ASAE.
Absolutely. We talk about that a lot in our product development, is a listening module. So are you listening to your members? Think about all of that unstructured data that you have and where it's coming from, whether it be a call center, whether it be your website, whether it be social. And are you really combining that to listen to what your members are saying anytime, really? We strive to be more relevant. And now we have our members and non-members talking and telling us things. Think about, are you really listening?
Yeah. Well, and one other thing I just thought of is And this is a great example. Like the content that's coming out of the chat here is super valuable. So how can we tap into bringing in some of the webinar chat data? Like we've had a couple webinars at ASAE recently that have been like 1,500 people. So being able to hear, the challenges that people have within a webinar format is another great way to grab that, to understand what's going on in our community.
Yeah, absolutely. Take that and apply text analytics, and you can really start to see what topics are trending, what sentiment would be around that. And so certainly a very relevant example is webinar or virtual conference chats. Mark, Emilio, any particular examples that you guys have of FAST data and how you're applying it?
I'll take a shot at it real quick. I think, FAST may be relative for everyone. I know right now, what we're really concerned with, especially as we look at the economic impact of COVID, is really tracking in real time what does our membership renewal trends look like, and getting onto the demographic level, and so that we can dovetail that in with what action are we seeing on our Connect platform. Is there a certain demographic, certain industry or organization type that we're not seeing the same renewal trends, and then we can either get out maybe some tailored marketing to them right away, programming, etc. We're making financial decisions right now for a shorter period of time because we are relying on that FAST data to give us some information in the near future that will help us determine what decisions do we need to make, 3 to 6 months down the road. And historically, we would have to make a decision now for something that's going to happen in December, and we would have no idea what's going to happen. So the fact that we have that data coming in, we aren't pigeonholing ourselves into making some of these decisions that are going to have long-term ramifications. We can take smaller, more manageable bite-sized chunks, make a decision over that period, wait, see what the data comes in, make some decisions, take some action, and then make subsequent decisions off of that. So that's how we're using it, especially in the current environment, to help ourselves.
And do you think this will continue on after? So if you're thinking about all of the changes that are taking place and we're all kind of adjusting and adapting, I always like to look at the silver lining. I'm hoping there are some good things that come out of this as well. Do you think some of these more nimble decisions, which, historically associations aren't great at, right? We're not really great at making fast decisions and adapting quickly. So at your organization, do you think some of these things might carry forward?
I mean, I certainly hope so.
Yeah.
I think one of the things, and I'd be curious what Emilio and Kristin are seeing, I've actually been really hopeful and pleasantly surprised at some of the collaboration that's happening in our industry with, not-for-profit, with membership associations on some of these topics. And unfortunately, I feel like, the cost to really get in the game and have some of the robust data, the investments that we've made, at least in our organization, have been a multi-year. And my fear is some organizations will just create a greater divide. And I think some of the associations that can make these decisions as nimbly and make their organizations as dynamic as possible will set themselves up to be very successful. And I think, I almost feel like it is incumbent upon us to help some of those other organizations that may not have those resources. And how can we either share some of what we're learning and whatnot, but internally, if we're doing this now, then I hope if my staff are listening, then you can bet the expectation is it's going to be forward, at least at this pace.
Yeah. Emilio, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, working at a healthcare organization, I think it's a great challenge, both great in the size of it, but also great in the sense that I'm so fortunate and blessed to be engaged in this kind of work right now, figuring out how to leverage this data to help us now. So regarding what are we doing with FAST data right now, I would say one of the things is our cash flow analysis is speeding up. It's more intense, it's more frequent, it's pulsing faster. We always did it. We always had the data really quickly on when transactions occurring and what amounts and towards what products, but our engagement with that data has gotten a lot more intense recently. On the content side, on the membership value side of things, our organization realized really quickly, our membership is composed of people who do healthcare quality work. And some of those people are in the front lines of this pandemic that we're facing right now. And some of those people are quarantined, or they're at home, or their business is slower than usual because of the situation. And so we really quickly recognized that there was one element where we had to continue business as usual and not lose any ground in that area. And then we had to diverge and engage in some business' unusual activities to support the members that are really in front of this thing right now. And so embarking on that business is unusual, we relied, it was critical that we leverage data quickly to measure what we're doing and to strategize on what our audience has the not just appetite, but capacity to do right now. And so we very quickly, worked with additional associations. We kind of formed a kind of healthcare alliance with other healthcare associations, and we created our own COVID resource center that has like micro learning content that's really meant to be digested very quickly in less than 15 minutes along a bunch of different areas, and we continually add to it. So from a fast data perspective, we are monitoring the crap out of how that page is being engaged with. It's a free resource for members and non-members alike. Basically, as we track engagement from that page, we see where people are getting to it from, how it's being accessed, what pieces of content are being accessed the most. Like that, those are the building blocks for us to really leverage this thing in a way that will help our people and move forward our mission of advancing healthcare quality. So this pushed us in a direction we already wanted to move in. We're still doing that strategic convening at a higher level to identify as an organization how we can leverage fast data everywhere, but we started applying it right there. And I think a lot of organizations, the silver lining on this thing is that they have an opportunity to have buy-in both from internally and with external stakeholders to really embark in a much more aggressive campaign of measurement. And so I do see that as a silver lining. And I think the organizations that started sooner rather than later are really in a position to kind of weather some of the financial storms that we see that might be coming our way. So, it's been very intense, but it's also been enormously rewarding for my organization.
Yeah, I would agree. The other thing that's really come to light, which we knew we wanted to do it, but I think with COVID, we've acknowledged that we need to have a lot of this member facing as well. So instead of just, our internal staff having access to it. So there's definitely been more conversations, and probably resources are going to be put towards making, some of this more member facing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So thinking about this kind of at a high level, fast data, right? In data and analytics, I guess, generally, what does the ideal state look like for you guys? And that could be within your organization and industry even. Emilio, you want to start?
Sure. I would say, I bring this thinking to most of the technology work I do, and I have a high sensitivity to the value of an articulated sequence of events. So my ideal situation of an organization leveraging fast data, it's definitely a dynamic one. So the data that's being analyzed and the reason for it being analyzed is dynamic and dependent on the needs of the organizations and its evolving priorities and the evolution of its own tactics and strategies. So dynamicism is a critical piece of it, I would say, the ideal state. And then from a sequencing perspective, it's never a matter of like wading into the data and trying to make sense out of it. It's the idea of a strongly articulated strategy and then a well-defined process for measuring that strategy, both at the very senior level, but then also down to the tactics. So I see fast data really being threaded through senior level, executive level considerations that go into annual work plans and strategic plans. But I see that thread of fast data tying all the way down to the things that people are doing, experimenting A/B subject lines for email messages, or deciding what web copy to use for different segments, or deciding what qualifies as a segment and what doesn't. I see fast data thread throughout the entire organization, and I see the only way is being able to get there is with a high level of dynamicism around what is tracked and why.
Absolutely. That's something that's really great about the association space. We all have a lot of data. So we have the asset. It's just being able to leverage it, like we're talking about here, and really put it into action. And so I've started to see really a trend in this space over the past 3 years of people being able to leverage it in bite-sized pieces, and now really getting to the place where they're able to have it holistically and have all of their data sources feeding in and being able to make these nimble, quick decisions because they don't have to worry about kind of cobbling together all of the data in order to, be nimble and make these quick decisions. So Mark, Kristin, what is one of your ideal states of data analytics and fast data at your organization?
Well, I mean, I've been thinking of a couple examples of what we've done. So I'll go to that angle. So previously we have a lot of different website properties, and we had to look up Google Analytics individually on each of those properties. And recently on through Acumen, we've been able to display all of our properties in one place. So we can do, that comparison. We can, look at search terms. We can, look at what is performing best. And so I think that's a great example of how we've been able to use, fast data, make it just so much more useful for the team.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to even the self-service idea, putting the data in the fingertips of the organization, regardless if that's at any level. I think that goes back to your point, Emilio. It needs to be in the fingertips of executives all the way down to your front line, even people entering the data. Something we noticed, even data quality dashboard. So that way people that are even doing data entry really understand how they fit into this larger picture of what the organization is trying to achieve. And everybody's so critical towards the mission. And having visualizations, KPIs, key performance indicators, allows everyone, and making those transparent, invisible. That's something else that could come up when you're thinking about fast data is, are we a transparent organization? Are we okay with everybody seeing all of this? And usually associations I found are, but has that been a challenge for any of you?
I mean, definitely some of the data owners are a little hesitant, but our strategy has been, there's no reason why we can't display any and all of the data. And the websites is actually another good example of that, where some people didn't want their website data posted. And we were like, unless you can give us a solid business reason why you don't want this to be available to all staff, then we are going to make it available to all staff. And I do think transparency has, we've created a much more transparent organization with all of this access to data. Because before, it almost seemed top secret. It seemed like, oh, you're, only a director, so you don't get this report. This report only goes up to the senior staff. So it's created a level of transparency that makes people feel like they are a part of the organization in a deeper way than they did before.
I have to say, I loved all the answers, but Emilio's answer to the last question, I really felt like I just wanted to be here. Like, oh,
Me too.
I'm so starstruck right now. Like, just like, please keep going.
Yeah.
But no, I have to come back to that last question, because I cannot agree more with what Emilio is saying. Our organization, what we've been talking about as a leadership team, and especially with our board, is this need to evolve. And not just like incremental evolution, but like bold, taking steps, especially from a position where we have the resources, or at least we used to have investments that were worth anything. But take those steps now from a position of, kind of power, for lack of a better word. And then we have this platform, we have our data coming in. We have to be able to align all of our visualizations, these dashboards, all of our analysis, align those with those new strategies, because we are going to have to get very comfortable with this whole, try or fail fast, fail forward, try, fail, adjust, whatever, euphemism you want to say. And that, at least since I've come to the association nonprofit world, that's a very uncomfortable kind of philosophy to embrace. Like, people are, perfectionists, and I heard from this member that this is an issue. It's one person, and we have to be comfortable failing and getting it wrong and moving on. But aligning it with the strategies, critical. And then the other piece, Kristin was talking about rolling the data out and making it accessible. Yes, one of the big things that we want to be doing once we get everything on board is rolling our platform out and creating a dashboard for our governance, for our board, our executive committee, letting them see it in real time, not waiting for board meetings. We want them to have that information. We want to be able to build it in a way where it's meaningful to a lot of our strategic initiatives that we talk about in the meetings. We just want them to have that data, throughout. So, but yeah, aligning it with strategy is critical. So Emilio, thank you so much for saying that. I really do I'm a huge fan right now. I'd love your autograph at some point.
Yeah, when we're allowed to be closer to each other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Emilio signing autographs somewhere.
Digital signature works.
Yeah, right.
I really appreciate that. I think working in nonprofits and associations for the last 10 or 11 years, I think we do a great job of transparency most of the time. And I think as someone from a mid to small size nonprofit, we're really transparent, especially about where there are holes, where there are gaps in the data. So there will be times where we have a conversation about something and we'll present data, but we're also building in like, hey, kind of hold your nose while you look at this stuff, because there's like 50% of the demographic information might have holes in it for these reasons, and this is how we're going to make it better next year, but for now this is what we've got. That kind of transparency is, I think, really critical to having honest conversations about what we know and what we can know. And I do see a lot of associations and nonprofits really just killing it on the transparency side, which is a great way to move forward productively.
I've noticed an increase, even with everybody becoming remote, in more transparency. Especially the people that have organizational key performance indicators, they now have them out there. And it's allowed people, this was a side effect that we certainly didn't anticipate. It's allowed people to find their stride even at home, to figure out how they fit into the organization and how they're going to evolve with the organization. So that, and also an increase in just overall demand of fast data, has certainly increased over the past few months. So it's no longer, I'll read that at the end of the month. We have people wanting things daily, hourly sometimes, because they're really looking to see maybe behaviors of renewals. I think, Mark, you talked about that. So are people renewing? I need a pulse of that, a real-time pulse, because it's uncertain right now. So certainly really looking at how we can carry these things forward. Amelia, what do you think about it? It sounds like you guys have already done this pre-COVID, but do you see some silver lining, or I guess positive behaviors coming out of this and moving forward throughout the rest of 2020?
For my organization in particular, I do see things that kind of give me hope that we're on the right track, and that this will translate into some of the bigger picture things we were trying to do anyway. So I'm really optimistic. I think what I have a sensitivity to in like living this and operationalizing like this method of work and this approach to work is really, what are people's capacity? Is there a way to do this that is sustainable over the long term? Is there pre-work that can be done that may be intense but can facilitate a more manageable route of analysis and reflection further down the road? I think these are questions that no one's answered yet, and I think we can answer them together, and I'm really excited to be on that journey. I think this is what's fun. This is what's fun, that even when things are hard or difficult, the fact that we're charting new space, we're leveraging technologies that are available to us that weren't before, and we're trying to do business in a different way. So the fact that the territory is kind of unmapped, I think, is part of the fun, but also I have a sensitivity to, you can't make it this intense thing that burns people out and then they do it for a year or they do it for a month and then they're done. How do we make this, how do we operationalize this? How do we build it into the DNA? You need those quick wins. You need those proof points. COVID is a source of introducing maybe some change on a more rapid scale than we anticipated. But let's find out a way together to like live into that permanently, so that we're highly attuned to our environment and reacting to it in a way that helps advance our missions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that goes back to Mark's point, and hopefully not creating a greater divide between associations and people that are able to adapt quickly, figure out how to make this a sustainable model to carry forward, and they'll continue to soar, right? And so any thoughts on how we can help the rest of the community, or provide resources, or anything we can do, or tips or advice to help some of the organizations that might be struggling a little bit with this?
I would say use cases, giving people examples of how you're using data, just making it really short, really succinct, easy. Because I think, just as I know we've found in our organization, and it sounds like others have, quick wins, small wins, get people using data in some way. And I think it really is kind of a domino effect. Once they get a taste of it and they see, wow, I can get this information, get this answer so quickly to a question that I have, and it's not just a gut reaction, then they get thirsty for more and they become a little bit more curious. And so I think just, the more we can share of wins and losses, and especially the losses, where have we failed? What did we try? What did we learn? What didn't work? Why didn't it work? I think just being honest and open with each other, we really have nothing to lose by doing that.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say.
And I would say definitely just do something,
Yes.
Just take the leap, take action. When I started in this role, it was a brand new role, and my boss told me I couldn't fail, which I was a little skeptical when he told me that, but it's true. If you can help your staff see meaningful patterns in the data to help them make better decisions, it is a win. And just take the leap and use the community. There's tons of communities, right here within the association space, depending on what software, you're using, there's a ton of different resources, and there's some great examples. Like Mark said, a lot of use cases, and just see what other people are doing and do exactly that. You don't have to start from scratch.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Go ahead, Amelia.
I was just gonna say, I think my biggest piece of advice is don't be afraid to be scrappy. So I think a lot of these conversations, like, people think about all the things they need or don't have, or the financial realities of the organization, or the capacity of the organization. And I think it's fair to in some degree to react that way, but also to really feel empowered to get started. My biggest piece of advice is don't get lost in the tactics or what you have and what you don't have. Think about the strategies that are really important to your organization in need of proof points, and start your investigations there if you have absolutely nothing and you want to get more further underway. It's a great starting point. It prevents you from getting mired in a bunch of data, and you can do it with PowerPoint. You can do it with Excel. The first inroads into leveraging fast data might be 5 data points married to a strategy that no one at your organization has ever done before. And even if it's manually refreshed in a PowerPoint deck once a day, from where I sit, if that strategy is hugely relevant to advancing your business and you're measuring it with proof points on a daily basis, it may not be a beautiful, expensive data warehouse, but you have fast data and you're leveraging things and you're pushing the needle of how businesses operate, how nonprofit and association businesses operate. So feel proud, feel empowered, and feel enabled to really make those kind of changes. You don't need a lot of glitz and glamour and money to really get this kind of stuff underway.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Kristin often talks about the duct tape model and how you can really do that regardless. And we often hear that too. That, and then something else you touched on earlier, Emilio, is, our data isn't in good enough condition. We don't have the best data quality. Don't let that stop you. Goes back to Kristin's point, push forward anyways. It will tell you a trend. You can find something. You will find some insight out of it, which then helps build data confidence. So, sometimes we're not always great at making a decision, right? We have a gut feeling, but we're like, okay, that's not good enough, right? That's not good enough to go in front of my board and make this decision. Data can really give you that data confidence, as Reggie calls it. A couple of other resources. There is a Power BI special interest group for associations, so we could post that in the chat, share ideas on there. Maybe we could even put together a discussion thread or something and post that in the chat too, where we can share some examples of these quick wins that you guys have shared. I think that would be a helpful resource too, something that people might be able to take out of this and try. And then Asset Association Analytics, we of course have a bunch of analysts on staff, and so we can set up some consultation time with you guys. My staff will kill me after this, but that's okay. It's really about coming together as a community. That's what the association space is for and about, and that's certainly what we're for and about. And so if we can help people even find one of those quick wins to get that traction at their organization, we're certainly open and willing to do that, would love to do that. So a couple of other things to kind of wrap it up. We talked about the future of fast data. Anything else that you guys can think of for the future of fast data and kind of what might be next, right? We talk about machine learning and AI and some of those applications. Is that feasible now in the association space, especially?
I mean, I think so. I think, I mean, not to keep talking about collaborate, but all of this unstructured data. I mean, I think for us that's our next best thing. Our next biggest thing is being able to use all of this open end, all of this unstructured data to, you know, help us make decisions. So that we're moving along that path.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think that the whole AI aspect, I think it's there. I mean, I think I turn off a notification on Outlook almost every day asking if I want like insights into all of my emails or whatever, something like that. I mean, applications, just run-of-the-mill applications, have more artificial intelligence. Everyone is clamoring to give you insights through using technology. I think sometimes people just may not realize what is already out there and how they're already using. More organizations are using, you know, when you hear the term like RPA, people are using it. When you automate your AP process, that is part of it. So I think organizations are probably using it and they may not even realize it. And it doesn't have to be, to Amelia's perspective or his comment and Kristin's, you don't need a huge budget to do this.
Yeah.
And actually, right now, this COVID environment, you're finding very innovative ways to get the job done. No matter how much money you have or don't have, people are finding ways to kind of MacGyver their way through various situations. So yeah, I think people are doing it already.
Yeah, that goes back to Emilio's point of being scrappy, right?
Yeah.
There are resources out there, you know, get scrappy, get them together, pull them out. Even if it's just to get the quick win, to get traction, that is so important to get over that. Emilio, what are your thoughts on kind of the future?
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that's been said. I mean, I feel like it's the opportunities are out there, and I think you're seeing AI and ML baked into so many SaaS applications that exist already. I think, you know, I don't think associations and nonprofits have leveraged them as deeply as we could. And I think part of that goes back to my point on strategy. So if we have an articulated strategy, it can be easier to figure out exactly what the value is, make the financial justification for one of these tools and literally tie it into the most essential elements of our business. But I also think what we're going to see moving forward is more of this concept of like data science as a service. So the same way the cloud hosts your email application or your AMS application, the idea that we can leverage the machine learning and AI to generate data scientist-like perspective on our data sets, I feel like that's where we're going. Like you're seeing the semantic web play out with different reporting tools where you can literally type a question in text and the tool will try to figure out like what you're trying to get to and report it to you. I think we're going to see more and more of that stuff. And I think associations and nonprofits' ability to blend into those enterprise level applications that exist is going to completely depend on our ability to kind of re-examine the traditional way things that have been done and be open to doing things in a slightly different way to leverage these really big accelerators that exist in the marketplace that again do not cost a lot of money and can do amazing things for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kristin, previously you mentioned a McKinsey article talking about how the strategy, I don't know if it was for COVID, pre-COVID, kind of any time. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we're trying to use the data ultimately to figure out what we should stop doing. And so we're in a mode of like reprioritizing and investing versus, you know, just like stopping and slashing. The McKinsey article, you know, did talk about kind of those two ways of thinking, and I think our data and the way that we're able to analyze it is going to allow us to, you know, pinpoint those things that we can stop doing and reinvest in things that would be, more appropriate or better for our members at this point in time.
Mark, are you guys looking at that or made any decisions on reinvesting anything based on the data that you found? I even know pre-COVID, you guys looked at your live seminars and kind of reallocating. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. Pre-COVID, one of the things that we were doing was we were looking at the data, predominantly financial, attendance, et cetera, and then anything that didn't make a certain cut, just saying we're going to slash this, but then that doesn't mean that it means there's still a need out there. So how do we just need to find a better way to fill that need. I think now, even more so with, conferences and going virtual, that's one aspect. Content, we can deliver content online. People, that's not exactly something that is a competitive advantage. But how do you deliver that experience? How do you deliver that networking aspect? And especially as we see, like on our community, our online community, people are craving just that outreach and being able to talk to someone or somebody that understands what they're going through right now. And how do we bring that to them? And how do we take that topic? And we're doing something similar to what Kristin mentioned, taking those topics, taking those interests in what people are discussing, and then putting content, putting program, putting instructions out there, leveraging that into our advocacy work. We're using that to pretty much just as like a kind of a hub, and the spokes that are coming off are hitting all the different divisions. But yeah, we're using it very much in the content programming arena.
Yeah, that's what we're hearing a lot too, is really looking at how you're communicating with the different even job types that you have within your organization, and how there's so much sensitivity right now in really understanding and being able to break that down by the different demographics that you have, and using data to do that. And then also the content game is just everything right now, right? So really being able to leverage everything to deliver the right content at the right time to the right audience, and even to the tone of having a recommendation engine that's feasible. We're seeing people do that, which is really exciting. Okay, so if you guys were kind of going to leave everybody with something that they can do tomorrow, right, to get into this fast data game, this is one of the drivers of change. And what I said and continue to say throughout all of this is really an opportunity to change. You should be able to and want to and go ahead and take advantage of this opportunity. Fast data is certainly one of them. ASAE has the 40 drivers of change. Check them all out. Make it a mission for you guys at your associations to take a couple and make those changes. But as far as fast data, is there any words you would leave, or I guess advice you would give to people if they had to do one thing? What would that be?
Well, I'll start, but I will continue to put in a plug for the ForesightWorks content, because there is a whole collection of drivers that are related to this, and in particular, the ones that talk about the workforce and the workplace really resonate. Like being more humans is one of them. This bifurcated our workforce. So this is the future. So you don't want to be the person who has this very singular, technology skill. You want to be able to be the person that can provide context, that can talk about the why behind the data, that can use, your brain to make decisions. And you do need the fast data behind it to be able to do that. So this is the future of work, and just dive in. Like we've talked about before, you don't need a fancy data warehouse. You could do this in Excel. You can, really easily, like Amelia said, put together a PowerPoint with some KPIs, and you can do this, and the community is here to support you.
That's great. Those are really encouraging words. And being a more human, that is one of my favorite ones.
Yeah, I love it.
I do too.
So
because
true, though.
Yeah. A lot of times people are like, oh no, a technology, fast data, what's happening? What's going to happen to my job functions? Well, if you think about a lot of times what you enjoy doing in your job and what you don't enjoy doing in your job, a lot of things you don't enjoy can be done by technology. So just taking a deep breath and allowing the technology to do what it's there for, and then you doing what nobody else can do, which is, interpreting that and putting it into your strategy and being a more human. And that's one of the ones that I certainly love as well. So Amelia, what about you?
I would say I preach for mindfulness and awareness being your biggest takeaway from this conversation. So I think the ForesightWorks is an excellent gift to us in the association community as a project, as an articulation of things that we should be aware of. Like when I go through the ForesightWorks action briefs, I don't walk away from them with a robust plan for action to my organization. But I have more mindfulness about these issues and these frontiers than I did before. And if you bring that mindfulness to your organization, if you encourage that mindfulness among your teams, I think what you'll see over time is maybe, especially in a situation like COVID, maybe less of a scrambling to the tactical level of an issue and more of a mindfulness and awareness of how we might start with a different perspective that'll improve the outcomes of what we're trying to accomplish. So I would say, lean into the awareness and mindfulness side of this, and thinking about fast data and your organization, and don't feel obligated to like, hit your desk after this meeting and figure out the first application of fast data for your organization. I can't say enough things about the value of the ForesightWorks project and its potential as a tool for generating mindfulness and awareness in your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, any advice
So
or one takeaway that people should walk
Yeah.
away from this conversation with? I'm sure there's been a ton all throughout, but
I mean, I think the takeaway is, this is doable. And if you think that it isn't, you're probably just psyching yourself out. Honestly, when we first started, when I came to NCAA CPA, and data was just it was just like languishing. Everyone was like BI, but nothing was getting done. And so we just started with something very simple. I asked every director, all their teams, to just go back and just said, I want you to come up and send me 3 questions. Look at our strategies. Look at what we're trying to do. I want just 3 questions that you have that you don't know the answer to. And then we would take those, and some of us that understood the BI, understood data and whatnot, we tried to develop an answer, or flesh that out a little bit more. But it was just a simple question that people that may not be data scientists by any stretch, that they just wanted to ask, and they had no idea how to get an answer to. And we took the simplest ones we could find and worked on those pretty quickly, and gave them an answer. And all of a sudden it was like an aha moment. And so what I would say is, so much right now is in the moment, and people are just scrambling to put out the hottest fire. And I think what has worked, and what I've seen work, at least at our organization, is if you can dedicate like 15, 20, 30 minutes a day, get out of the fire, right? Look forward, and you will a calm and an excitement will come over you if you can say, hey, we're going to get out of this. But when we do, what do I have? What question is there? What do I need to know? And start just thinking about questions that you have. And then one of those questions, work with someone in your organization that maybe understands the data, or call someone in another association that understands data and flesh it out. How do I find an answer to this? But be mindful to take some time in the current environment to look forward, look at your strategies, look where you want to go, and try to just begin asking questions and writing them down, and then work with someone that can help you maybe find an answer or the first step of an answer.
yeah, that's really great advice. And oftentimes when you do that, you're then allowed, or it leads you to asking a better quality questions. So you may not be able to come up with all of the questions, and you don't have to. There are going to be questions that you don't know you have, but as you start to explore, you'll come up with those. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I like to tell people is an assumption that you make, or that your organization makes. Start with that. It's a question, usually. So an assumption that you all make or have made for a long time, and back that up with data. And you'll see people at your organization start to rally around that and understand why this is important. So that's a really great advice there. All right, so this, I promise, is the last thing. I thought that was, but I thought about something you said, Mark. If everybody can share one either aha moment or one thing that kind of still keeps you up at night, what would that be? See everybody thinking.
The internet going down?
Oh my God.
No Zoom?
Everything is on, like, our warehouse is on the internet, all of our analytics. Sorry. That's not really a fast data probably issue. It's just an overall issue.
That's okay. What keeps you up at night anyways, right? That's one I actually didn't think about, but thanks. I'm going to be awake all night now.
Disney Plus breaking. If Disney Plus breaks, it is like just anarchy at my house.
What about you, Emilio? Any aha moments through all of this, or something you want to share that keeps you up at night?
I wish I had an aha moment to keep things positive, but I think the thing that, one of the things I go back to when I think about things that keep me up at night is, I really do value and really treasure the association and nonprofit workforce. And I think what we're going through right now is going to be a difficult challenge for it. You know, there are people in our workforce that haven't even been through the Great Recession that happened in 2008. And so, you know, this population of people that haven't encountered a thing like this before may not be appreciating it may not appreciate those silver linings the same way that this group here, we can convene on it and think about it with that lens. So I really think about, okay, how can we empower the people, the people that are up and coming in this workforce, to really live out these principles that we see that are so vital to our business and to advancing our business. And that's the question I think we all answer together. That I think that's the kind of question that I am so grateful to be on this panel with this group, talking with you all about it, knowing that this will be a resource that others can access. I see that as the question that we all have to answer in the coming months ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back to, you know, we are a community. Let's continue to provide resources, whatever they may be, whatever you might be able to contribute, and hold together through all of this, because I know that's what the association space really is really great at doing. So with that, I want to thank all of you for contributing today. Really great content, absolutely wonderful leaders and people, wonderful humans that we have here with us today. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us today. We really appreciate your additional perspectives, and we hope you found the program valuable. We are dropping a feedback form in the chat right now. We'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas for moving forward. We ask your big takeaways at the end of the session because we're going to be putting together a resource that rounds up some of the responses. We will share out this resource with you shortly, and we hope it will be useful for you moving forward. We'll share that Collaborate link now so you can continue and expand the conversation. We're also sharing a link to register for the next discussion in this series, taking place on May 28th, which will focus on challenges and opportunities related to the shifting environment for content driver of change. We hope you'll join us then. Thanks again and have a great day.